Right, so it's no secret that I find Keir Starmer about as appealing as a fart in a lift. But it seems whilst the Tories have stunk up the waterways of our country, Starmer's decided to attack the air we breathe instead, as he's decided, in a very rare example of apparently opposing the Tories no less, he's dropped Labour's commitment to clean air zones in the country, claiming that clean air zones are Conservative government policy. The Tories are the ones who have pushed councils to introduce them. Labour is not in favour of extra burdens on drivers during a Tory-made cost of living crisis. Labour's priority is growing the economy to improve living standards and tackle the cost of living crisis, not pushing up costs for hard-working families. We are committed to tackling air pollution and we will introduce a Clean Air Act. But we will always look at options for reducing air pollution which do not put the burden on hard-working families. So basically, we can't have clean air, according to Team Keith, unless we vote for the Tories because it's their policy, not his, despite the fact Starmer is wedded to so many other Tory policies without worrying one little bit about those. And all on the basis of affordability, because the Tories caused a cost of living crisis, which Labour still says it needs to fix, yet Labour don't see it as their job to fix as far as clean air goes. And ordinary people across the country shouldn't be made to pay for that, even though everybody needs clean air to breathe. It might just be the stupidest thing Starmer has ever come out with. Has his hatred of tree huggers and climate change activists rotted his brain, or is the air in Holborn and St Pancras constituency now so poor it's poisoned his mind? More likely it's just him flip-flopping again. Because as one of the biggest liars in Parliament as he is, there's always a receipt saying something else. Because back in 2019, Starmer launched a clean air plan himself at Camden Council. He said at the time, air quality, climate change is the issue of our time. And as the Extinction Rebellion protests showed us this week, the next generation are not going to forgive us if we don't take action. That clean air plan happened to state there are good signs ahead. Large-scale policy interventions, such as the Mayor of London's ULEZ, will help us make a big inroad into air pollution. Well, perhaps the crux of Starmer's change of heart then, because the biggest clean air zone going right now is the ULEZ expansion across London. The Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan, is flicking two fingers to Starmer over and pressing ahead with regardless. But of course, Starmer blames Khan's ULEZ scheme for losing that Uxbridge by-election recently. Certainly not the whole story there by any means, as Labour voters stayed at home, not least the local CLP who got shut out of the by-election process completely, not their fault at all. London Labour took it over. More of Starmer's authoritarianism on show, certainly playing its part. So blame yourselves, Keith, though he never does that, does he? So presumably, Starmer's got it into his thick, brill-creamed head now that climate change isn't a vote winner. Never mind it being what the planet needs, being put first and foremost by governments around the world. If it won't win him votes, stuff the planet, stuff clean air, stuff the tree huggers. He does hate them after all. His words. ULEZ is not a bad thing. I don't think anyone can disagree with the need to be breathing clean air. But Khan has pushed ahead with it without the necessary support being in place to help people replace vehicles so they aren't hit with an exorbitant daily charge of £12.50 a day. The least well off with the oldest cards, the ones that would be targeted by this after all. So it's unfair in its implementation, and that's turned people against something they should all be broadly supportive of, regardless of their politics, because we all need clean air to breathe. But it's about votes and voters for Starmer. It's about power. He'd frankly see the situation worsen entirely if he thought it would bring in more votes. And funnily enough, that is exactly what he's done with his latest announcement, by not only turning his back once again on Khan's London ULEZ expansion, but he is now against clean air zones being rolled out anywhere, on the basis it's Tory policy to have clean air. It really is peak dumbassery. Khan hasn't said a peep either, which might not surprise many given he's Starmer's faction at the end of the day, but he is at least in an elected position of power, unlike Starmer, and if he had any balls, might tell him as much. Others in the party are expressing disquiet over it as well, especially since Starmer shut down any dissenting voices over his anti-clean air stance, anti-ULEZ views that suddenly appeared at the recent National Policy Forum, held with members and trade unions following that Uxbridge defeat. The green crap, as David Cameron once called it, seems to be held in much the same view by Keir Starmer as well, though Starmer is largely seen in a very David Cameron-esque light. Let's just hope there isn't a pig anywhere in his background. The former Shadow Environment Secretary Rachel Maskell put it quite well. As she said, a ULEZ cannot be introduced without proper mitigation. We know that the cost of electric cars is prohibitive, True. But we've got to address the practical reality, and that's by putting green alternatives forward. We've got to remember it is people living in the most deprived areas that are most affected by poor air quality. This goes to an essential value of Labour, and we've got to seriously look at this before coming to office, because the consequences of not doing so will mean people could die unnecessarily. Absolutely right. Well done, Rachel Maskell. It's obvious to anyone wanting to actually address the clean air issue. It just isn't important to those seeking power for the sake of it, like Starmer clearly is. And I think this issue clearly exposes that. Being against clean air is just the most stupid thing. He mentioned a Clean Air Act, though, as an instead of his supporters might be pointing out. OK, so legislating for clean air, then. How are you going to make it happen? A Clean Air Act will only put a legal requirement on areas to have clean air. On councils, on businesses producing emissions, perhaps. But with Labour coming out in opposition to the actual mitigating measures it would take to deliver clean air, how can councils, for example, obey such laws? Introduce your own ULEZ, they might be saying, the Labour might say to these councils, but like Khan, they'll then have to struggle to deliver it without enough money because central government, Labour, like the Tories now, won't supply it. Fiscal rules and all that. I'm sure that'll be the excuse. If it fails, Starmer can point to the council as to blame when really it's political choice at his end. It's Tories 101, just as it's a political choice by the Tories now to not put money into London ULEZ to make it possible without impacting those least well off. At the end of the day, if it was a Tory mayor of London, would they be withholding the funding? It's probably less likely, isn't it? Starmer would withhold it from his own Labour mayor, though, and he's just admitted as much with his continuous attacks on Sadiq Khan. A legal right to breathe clean air doesn't deliver clean air. It's just lip service when it doesn't, in and of itself, change anything. And the changes need Labour's leadership now opposes. And by doing so, have answered the question, what is the point of the Labour Party? And that by this action can be answered by saying, making the Tory party look like the least worst of the two options to give us clean air. And the Tory party should never be the answer to anything, except which party do you most want to see collapse into nothingness within your own lifetime? Fortunately, though, you'd have to ignore mainstream voices over this, but there are other options than just voting Labour or Tory. Green Party policy, let's come to that. You might have guessed I'd get to it at some point, being a Green. Green Party policy and clean air. It's been Green Party policy to expand ULEZ zones for years now, but obviously requires the funding to put in to make it happen and help people transition away from higher polluting vehicles to do so. Not cheap. But it is, as I always say, political choice to not put the money into something. We can't eat money. We can't breathe money. It is stupid that money ends up being the barrier when we can print all that we need to pay for this, and we can tax wealth, because there's plenty of it to tax, to offset that spending. It's absolutely deliverable. It is a choice by the two main parties, the two main waste of space parties and their oxygen thief leaders to not do so. So if you want to keep breathing and not be impoverished further by those refusing to invest in its delivery, then you really do need to vote Green. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please leave a comment and be part of the conversation though. Meanwhile, here's another vid for you where Labour could be about to put a celebrity up against what the one Green MP that we have in this country. Such, it seems, is their desire to attack their party in as high a profile manner as possible. I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.